I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are standing inside an independent bookstore.
Oh, I love that setup.
Right. You know the smell.
Right.
It's that mix of old paper, maybe some roasted coffee from a cafe next door, and just this quiet concentration.
Yeah, that's a very specific vibe.
It really is. And you're looking at the arrangement of books, and on the surface, it just looks like standard retail, right? Like, put the popular stuff in the front, organize the rest by genre.
Sure, the usual logic.
Exactly. But what if the way those books are organized isn't just about moving inventory? What if those shelves are actually a physical map of human psychology, like supply and demand, and basically the death of the rules-based order?
That is such a phenomenal premise to start with, because we usually look at bookstores as, places to find stories.
Right.
But today, we are reading the store itself, and we are looking at a massive, incredibly dense stack of sources today. I mean, we've got economic white papers, retail psychology studies, and some really heavy essays on power dynamics.
Yeah, the sources are intense. And the mission of this deep dive today is to take all that material and basically hand you the ultimate conceptual toolkit.
Which I think people really need right now.
Oh, absolutely. We are going to look at how you can navigate chaotic, hyper-competitive, completely broken systems without losing your sanity. Or, well, what our sources call your quantum of agency.
Your quantum of agency. I love that phrase.
Same. So let's just step right up to the shelves. Let's unpack this whole retail blueprint. If you really look at the layout of a good bookstore, you essentially have two opposite poles.
Right, the curated shelf and the discount bin.
Exactly.
Let's look at the curated shelf first, because it targets a very specific psychological state, what the sources call the seeker.
The seeker.
Yeah. The books here, think of titles like Annie Lowry's The Time Tax, or these really deep volumes on navigating specific health issues or bureaucratic inequality. These are evergreen.
Meaning they don't really go out of style.
Right. They command full retail price, and they never go on sale. And the reason why is because they solve deep, structural human problems. A book on understanding how complex systems fail you is just as relevant today as it will be, 5 years from now.
Yeah, and I also noticed that this shelf relies really heavily on human authority. Like, you'll often see shelf talkers.
Oh, the little handwritten notes?
Yeah, those little index cards from the staff taped to the edge of the shelf. I mean, I always stop to read those.
They're great.
They act like a human heuristic. It's someone cutting through the sheer volume of publishing to say, hey, trust me, the signal-to-noise ratio in this specific book is incredibly high.
Which is completely vital when you are a seeker. You need that curation. But then if you walk to the front of the store and look at the discount bin, it's totally different.
Oh, yeah, it's chaotic.
This space targets the browser. It's usually this giant table with a blazing 50% off sign, stacked deep with mass market hype.
Like highly partisan political punditry, celebrity memoirs, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It relies entirely on volume and impulse buying. But the fascinating thing about the discount bin is that structurally, it is basically a physical monument to a publisher's overestimation of the market.
Wow, yeah.
It represents a fleeting news cycle. Once the outrage or the hype decays, the inventory just has to be dumped.
Well, wait, let me stop you there, because this feels like a perfect mirror for the battle between algorithms and true curation.
How so?
Well, take Amazon, for example. It is the ultimate algorithmic fulfillment machine. It serves that browser state perfectly. It gives you exactly what you just searched for, which, just reinforces your existing echo chamber.
Right. It feeds the loop.
Yeah, but an independent bookstore survives because it builds what the sources call semantic adjacency.
Semantic adjacency. That's a great concept. How does that play out on the physical shelf, though?
So instead of just feeding you more of the same, they will place a book on, say, the strict physical mechanics of sports right next to a book on abstract science or human biology.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the physical proximity of unrelated ideas forces you to slow down. It literally short-circuits that fast-paced, scrolling browser mindset and forces you to transition into a thinker.
That shift right there, from browser to thinker, is the exact cognitive leap required to understand how power actually operates.
Because you're paying attention to the connections.
Exactly. The curated shelf shows us how systems are supposed to logically connect. But if you keep walking down the aisles, the specific books on those shelves tell us a much darker story about how systems actually break down in the real world.
Walk me through that. Like, how do we get from a quiet bookstore aisle to The complete breakdown of society.
Well, our sources point out a specific sequence of books you often find near the history and politics sections.
Okay.
You start with high-minded national policy. These are the massive theoretical blueprints of how a government or a giant corporate system is supposed to work.
The ideal version.
Right. Then, sitting right next to them, you have the tell-all books about the disillusioned political operatives, the people actually running the machine in the mud.
The messy reality.
Yeah. And finally, you land on books about the raw demographic and capital shifts. For example, books documenting how ruthless investment bankers and yuppies completely conquered New York in the 1980s.
Ah, so we are tracing the degradation of institutional theory down into raw, on-the-ground reality.
Exactly.
We have this really pervasive illusion that our systems run on high-trust models. It's what the sources call mom ethics, or the classic Swede consensus model.
Right, the idea that people just play nice.
Yeah, it's the belief that if you write a strongly worded policy or put up a rule, people will follow it out of a sense of institutional duty or fairness or even just shame.
But the problem is, if you drop mom ethics into a zero-sum, hyper-competitive global arena, it fails spectacularly. In an unconstrained system, Gresham's law applies to morality.
Wait, I know Gresham's law from economics. It's the idea that bad money drives out good money.
Exactly.
Like if a country has pure silver coins and cheap mixed metal coins circulating together, people will hoard the silver and only spend the cheap stuff until only the cheap stuff is left.
Yep.
So how does that apply to morality?
It works the exact same way with human behavior. Bad behavior drives out good behavior if the system doesn't physically punish it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. To the ruthless players operating in the dirtiest games, a rule isn't a moral boundary. It is simply an arbitrage opportunity.
Just a gap to exploit.
Precisely. The old guard built institutions relying on gentlemen's agreements, handshakes, social norms. But a modern sociopathic operator looks at a norm and realizes that if a boundary isn't physically enforced, it effectively doesn't exist.
So they view your mom ethics as just an exploitable weakness.
Exactly. The person who cuts corners gets ahead, and suddenly everyone else has to cut corners just to survive the environment.
Which means the old guard is just catastrophically unequipped for modern power dynamics. So if mom ethics and interpersonal HR workshops, the kind of stuff you'd read about in a book like Crucial Accountability.
Right, the standard corporate playbook.
If that stuff is entirely useless against the sociopathic monopolies detailed in, say, Scott Galloway's The Four, what is the actual solution? How do you constrain a bad actor who literally does not care about your feelings, your strongly worded emails, or your social norms?
You introduce a concept called parametric liability.
Parametric liability, okay.
You stop asking bad actors to wash their hands, and instead you change the physics of the game board. You build deterministic actuarial constraints.
Okay, that sounds incredibly heavy, and frankly, a little dystopian. Like, actuarial constraint sounds like an algorithm automatically docking my pay if I make a typo.
I can see why it sounds like that, but
Help me understand how this works in practice.
it's not about micromanaging individual humans. It's about removing the subjective, easily manipulated human element from the enforcement of massive rules.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say a massive corporation pollutes a river. Currently, we rely on a really slow court system, subjective human arguments, and basically listening to a CEO claim their intentions were good only to pay a tiny fine 5 years later.
Right, which is just the cost of doing business for them.
Exactly. Parametric liability means if a specific mathematically measurable boundary is crossed, like toxins in the water hitting a certain part per million, a massive financial penalty is triggered automatically by the math.
Oh, so there's no debate.
None. The liability is parametric and immediate. It bankrupts the bad behavior before it can spread without needing anyone's permission or a lengthy trial.
So is the difference between patching the box and decomposing the box?
Yes.
Because the standard tech industry playbook, which we see in books like Blitzscaling, is to just throw capital and code at a flawed, exploitative system, force scale it, and hope you can patch the software rules later with better policies.
Which never works out.
Right. But a real engineer, a decomposer like Yuri Levine, talks about in his book Fall in Love with the Problem, not the solution. They don't just patch a broken box.
No, a decomposer walks right up to the boundary of the problem, reverse engineers the materials the box is built from, and proves the constraints were artificial to begin with. They don't write a new policy. They build a new physical reality.
Let's translate that into engineering terms, just because I think it helps clarify the mindset. We're talking about demanding hardware-attested reality down to the absolute cache line boundaries of a server.
Exactly.
To put it simply, you don't put a flimsy Please do not steal terms of service agreement on a website and expect hackers to follow it. You engineer the physical constraints of the computer chip so the data physically cannot be accessed. You don't trust the software to regulate the software. You change the physics.
That structural decomposer mindset is vital at the macro level, but I think we really need to bring this down to the listener's daily reality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because how do you apply this when you aren't regulating a massive tech company? How do you apply this when you are dealing with a toxic workplace or a broken department where colleagues are constantly throwing stones and hiding their hands?
Well, our sources actually pull from something incredibly old to answer this. They call it the Sanskrit news.
The Sanskrit news.
Yeah, it's basically the ancient foundational root code of human behavior. And they specifically point to Homer's The Odyssey for this.
Oh, classic.
Right. So Odysseus is sailing through a strait and has to face this terrifying multi-headed monster named Scylla. Odysseus, being the classic proactive hero, wants to understand the truth of the monster so he can put on his heavy armor, grab his weapons, and fight her on the deck.
Standard hero stuff.
Exactly. But the sorceress, Circe, gives him advice that goes against every hero instinct he has. She tells him simply, do not put on your armor.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive, right? Like, why would you face a monster without armor?
Yeah, it makes no sense on the surface.
But Circe understands the physics of chaotic systems. Armor is a trap.
Because putting on armor is an admission of vulnerability. If you are putting on armor, you are implicitly communicating to the system that you are preparing for a battle you might lose.
Yes. And in a toxic corporate environment, an armored person isn't dangerous. They are just another participant validating the system's threat.
Wow, yeah.
If you get bogged down responding to every passive-aggressive email or fighting every unfair critique, engaging in that fight consumes all your kinetic energy. You are playing the monster's game on the monster's terms.
Okay, I get that. Refusing to wear armor works great if you're Odysseus in a myth.
Yeah.
But I have a mortgage to pay.
Sure.
If my boss is a monster and I just stand there without armor, I get fired. So shouldn't I just hide, like put my head down, put in my noise-canceling headphones and try to outsmart the office politics by just masking my intentions?
See, what you're describing there is camouflage. And camouflage contains a fatal architectural flaw.
Which is?
It assumes you can perfectly predict the trajectory of the next stripe so you know exactly what to hide from.
Oh.
And in a truly chaotic, high-entropy environment, you cannot predict where the stone is coming from. True mastery isn't fighting, and it isn't hiding. It is maintaining a pristine OODA loop.
The OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. It's a military concept. But what does maintaining a pristine loop actually look like when my boss is actively screaming at me?
Normally, when someone attacks you or a system throws chaos at you, your brain skips directly from observe to react. You panic, you get defensive, you yell back.
Right, fight or flight.
Exactly. A pristine OODA loop means putting an impenetrable wedge between the observation of the threat and your reaction to it. You track the reality of the hazard, but you do not let it dictate your emotional state.
You stay detached.
Yes. Circe's advice to Odysseus is brutal here. She tells him he is going to lose 6 men to the monster. Accept the signal loss. Keep your hands on the wheel, do not stop the ship to fight, and just keep rowing past the noise.
Just row past the noise. Accept that there will be damage, but keep moving toward your actual objective. That is incredibly powerful. But let's push on this a little bit. Because if you aren't wearing armor, and you aren't hiding in camouflage, how do you hold your ground against a system that actively wants to corner you? You can't just passively row while everything burns around you.
You don't hold your ground passively. You do it through a concept called generative sovereignty.
Generative sovereignty.
Instead of trying to control a chaotic multiplayer environment, which is honestly a fool's errand, you establish your own coordinates. You drop what the sources call an invariant.
An invariant.
Yeah.
Like a fixed point.
Yes.
The sources bring up a fantastic fictional example of this, actually. Matt Cawthon from the Wheel of Time fantasy series.
Oh, I love that example.
Matt is a character who looks completely reckless to everyone else. He drops into these incredibly chaotic, high-stakes political environments, and he doesn't try to control anyone. He doesn't scheme. He just accepts the entropy of the room, rolls the dice in his head, and operates.
Right.
But his recklessness is actually a flawless strategy.
Mm-hmm.
By refusing to adapt to their toxic rules, he becomes the heaviest, most predictable object on the board.
The physics of that stance are really fascinating, because when you drop an invariant, you are essentially establishing your own gravity. You are saying to the room, this is my mass, Orbit or collide, it's your choice.
I am the fixed coordinate. But I need to ground this. What are the actual mechanics of dropping an invariant in, say, a normal Tuesday staff meeting?
Okay, let's say you're in a meeting and everyone is screaming about a missed deadline. The room is sheer entropy. Everyone is passing blame.
A nightmare scenario.
Right. Dropping an invariant means you refuse to engage in the panic. Instead, you're the one person who brings a perfectly organized spreadsheet of the timeline, the bottlenecks, and the immediate next steps.
You just bring the facts?
You don't yell over anyone. You don't try to teach closed-off people how to behave. You just drop your competence pixel onto the table, and you let the water break around you.
Wow.
You force the chaotic system to rotate around your undeniable standard of work. You don't react, you generate.
That completely flips the dynamic. Okay, let's take this idea of being an invariant and look at the actual mechanics of truth in the modern world. Our sources dive into Harry Frankfurt's famous book on truth, and they completely dismantle the false dichotomy that we are usually sold about how to succeed.
The standard belief in most institutions is that you only have two choices, right?
Yeah.
You can either be a passive purist, someone who stubbornly clings to the moral high ground but constantly loses out on promotions, or you can be a deceptive bullshitter, someone who wins by using impression management, buzzwords, and manipulation to climb the ladder.
We are constantly told that to win, you have to compromise your integrity. But our sources say that's a complete trap. There's a third way, the ultimate outsmart, and it's called epistemic legitimacy.
Let's contrast this with moral legitimacy. Moral legitimacy is the operator who says, my intentions are pure, my urges are good, I am on the right side of history, so don't slow me down with your rules or audits.
Just trust me.
Exactly. It relies entirely on trusting their character, which creates massive blind spots and usually leads to disaster. Epistemic legitimacy, on the other hand, operates entirely differently. Think of it like a driver's license.
I think this analogy is brilliant. You don't get to drive 80 miles per hour on the highway just because you're a morally good person who volunteers on weekends.
Exactly. Your moral character is totally irrelevant to the highway. You get to drive 80 miles per hour because you have proven, under load, that you can navigate the machinery without crashing into anyone. Your competence is mathematically and physically verified.
So, if you possess epistemic legitimacy in your career, you can execute what we might call the judo flip of the winning narrative. Let's say you are dealing with a hostile corporate gatekeeper. Maybe it's a risk auditor whose entire job is to find flaws and kill your project.
We all know the type.
Yeah. The standard instinct is to put on armor, argue with them, and try to persuade them that your project is good.
Which never works, because persuasion relies on impression management. Instead, you perform the judo flip. You hand them the artifact.
The artifact. What does
Okay.
that mean in this context?
An artifact is an offline verifiable tape of your execution. You hand the gatekeeper your complete raw data. You hand them your failure history, your stress tests, your raw code.
You give them everything.
Yes, you take their own rigorous audit tools and you make those tools your instrument. You don't say, trust me. You say, here's the math, break it if you can.
Because an artifact requires zero impression management. When that gatekeeper tries to attack your system, but your system is mathematically verifiable and structurally sound, their attack automatically converts into their own conviction.
Exactly.
They don't crush your project. They end up rearming themselves with your standard because your standard is safer and more reliable than whatever metrics they were using before.
It makes me think of the historical building of Manhattan, which our sources actually mention, pulling from the book Taking Manhattan.
Oh, right.
When you are dealing with chaotic, hostile imperial overseers or just a massively complex wilderness, you don't win by fighting in the mud. You lay down a grid.
A structural foundation.
You build a legal, physical, and commercial architecture so highly functional and so undeniably verifiable that the surrounding chaos has absolutely no choice but to organize itself around your standard.
That is the ultimate expression of generative sovereignty. You aren't asking for permission to exist. You aren't fighting the old system. You are laying down the grid that everyone else suddenly realizes they need to use in order to survive.
And that brings us full circle to the very beginning of our sources.
It really does. Let's zoom out a little bit and look at the journey we've just taken today. If you are listening to this on your commute or, taking a walk, think about the ground we've covered. We started by standing in the aisles of an independent bookstore, noticing how real value survives by providing semantic adjacency.
Right, forcing us to slow down and think, rather than just feeding the fleeting algorithmic hype of the discount bin.
From there, we look at the failure of high-trust mom ethics. We recognize that in a zero-sum game, human norms will always be exploited by sociopathic actors.
And to survive that, we have to move toward parametric liability, those deterministic actuarial constraints where the physical reality of the system prevents the bad behavior.
We learned from Circe and Odysseus that when dealing with monsters, putting on heavy armor is a trap that just consumes your energy and validates the threat.
And hiding in camouflage doesn't work either. Instead, you keep your OD loop pristine. You track the reality, accept the signal loss, and just keep rowing past the noise.
And ultimately, we arrived at the concept of epistemic legitimacy. The realization that true agency, your quantum of cause, isn't about defending a moral high ground or fighting endless battles with corporate gatekeepers.
It's about dropping a verifiable artifact, establishing your invariant, and letting the undeniable physics of reality do the heavy lifting for you.
Which brings us to a final, provocative thought for you to carry into your day. Think about a conflict or a chaotic broken system you're currently navigating right now. Maybe it's a toxic project at work or a really difficult dynamic in your community. Ask yourself, are you exhausting your kinetic energy trying to put on armor and fight Goliath on his own terms? Or is it time to stop pitching, drop your invariant, hand over the receipts, and simply row past the noise? Think about that next time you find yourself wandering the quiet aisles of a bookstore.